Welcome to Genki 1, Lesson 8, Grammar Point 1. In this lesson, you will learn how to form present tense short forms of verbs, adjectives, and nouns. This is one of my favorite grammar points to teach in person. It's a little more challenging to do this online, but let's give it a go. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is teach you how to make the present tense short form of verbs. We'll take this by the various parts of speech. So what's the difference between short form and long form verbs, first of all? The long form verbs you studied in lesson 3, these are the verbs that have been conjugated to end in mas or in the affirmative or masen in the negative. And we have been using these long forms, also known as formal forms or distal forms, or just plain old mas forms. We have been using these for conversation with people we don't know that well or people who are senior to us. This is a really common approach for Japanese language textbooks. They like to teach you a sort of base level of formality, and then once you've gotten some of the basics down, then they bring in the short forms, which can be used to speak informally. But remember that using appropriate levels of politeness and formality is really important in Japanese, so don't throw away your mas forms once you start to learn your short forms. Okay, so there are some nice surprises here when it comes to short form verbs, because present tense affirmative short form verbs are just the dictionary form. So if you have been studying from the Genki vocabulary lists, and you have memorized all your new vocab in their dictionary forms, then you already know their short forms. So the present tense affirmative short form is the same as the dictionary form, and this holds true for root verbs, verbs, and irregular verbs. So really what you need to learn is how to form the negative present tense of the three different categories of verbs that you know. So as usual, root verbs are the easiest ones to work with. When you want to create the present tense negative short form of a root verb, you just drop that final ru and you add nai. So for example, taberu becomes tabenai, ukiru becomes okinai, neru becomes nenai. Very straightforward, as is usually the case when we're conjugating a root verb. When we are working with verbs, it's a little more complicated. Remember, the dictionary form is still the present tense affirmative form. The present tense negative is formed by dropping the final u sound from the verb and adding anai. But if there is a consonant in that final syllable or final kana of the dictionary form, you have to remember to hold on to that. Just like you did when you learned how to create the mas forms. In that case, you added the imas. So remember, kaku became kakimas. In this case, we also are using kaku as an example. So you take kaku, you retain that final K consonant, and add anai, and you get kakanai, right? To not write. Yomu becomes yomanai, oyogu, oyoganai, etc. If the final kana of the dictionary form, sorry, there's a missing M there, is an u, as in au or kau, then you have to add a sound in, and that becomes wanai. So kau becomes kawanai, au becomes awanai. And then for irregular verbs, we just have to memorize what their negative short forms are because they are irregular. Kuru becomes konai, suru becomes shinai, and then compound verbs that use suru, like benkyou suru, becomes benkyou shinai. So that's how you make present tense short form verbs in the affirmative and the negative. Next, we're going to look at adjectives, particularly e-adjectives. So again, we're going to review the present tense long form of e adjectives. In the affirmative, it becomes takai desu. And in the negative, remember it became takakunai desu. So to get the negative present tense, you drop the final e from that e adjective and add kunai desu. To create the short forms of e adjectives, super easy, just drop desu. So takai, takakunai. Oishii, oishikunai. And then remember our irregular verb e, again, when it conjugates into the negative, becomes yokunai. So if you were strong on chapter 5 with the adjectives and you learned how to make these negative forms already, then you're set for the short forms. Just drop desu and you've got it. Our last category of short forms are not adjectives and nouns. Remember, they generally function the same when it comes to conjugations. So again, we have some examples of present tense, long form, not adjectives, and nouns. Remember, when these words come at the end of the sentence, the not adjectives come at the end of the sentence, you don't include the not. So just shizuka desu or shizuka janai desu, affirmative and negative. An example with nouns, gakusei desu or gakusei janai desu. So here, the tricky thing is in the short form affirmative, desu changes into da. However, oftentimes the da is left out when you are using informal speech. This is actually grammar point 2 of lesson 8, and I will cover it in depth more in another video. But so desu turns into da for the short form affirmative. For the short form negative, again, you just drop the desu. So shizuka da and shizuka janai, short form not adjectives. And then gakusei da, gakusei janai for short form nouns. Okay, so I've focused here on the mechanics of the situation, right, of how to create these short forms. But really the reason they're valuable is because they are used in so many different expressions in Japanese. So in future videos, I will cover further grammar points of lesson 8. And those will cover some of the many ways that short form verbs are used in Japanese, including informal speech, expressing opinions, quoting other people, and grammar point 5, which I really like, learning how to make a verb behave like a noun. In the case of this lesson, it's so you can learn how to say things like, I like swimming, and use the verb as a noun in a sentence like that. Anyway, I think it's very common for students when they first learn these forms to sort of equate short forms with informal speech. Certainly informal speech is one of the most common ways that the short form is used, but not every short form conjugation is part of an informal utterance. Anyway, this will get you started with short forms in the present tense. Lesson 9, grammar point 1, will have short forms in the past tense. Once you've worked through these 2 lessons, you have covered what I think is everything you need, all the foundational material you need to continue learning Japanese. Sort of this lesson 8, lesson 9 are the ends of the basics. So hope to see you back sometime soon. See you next time.